Good afternoon. It's 4 o'clock. I'm Dale Berman, the temporary chairman of the Stormwater Management Planning Committee for Kane County, and I'm calling it to order at 4 o'clock on Tuesday, April 12th, 2022. And we'll open with a roll call.
Rowley,
Here.
Beck, Burns,
Present.
Captain, Pickett,
Go.
Conan, Bates,
Bates, yes,
Berman,
here.
Herman here.
Kenyon, Martin,
Martin present.
Sanchez, Wonicky, Fraz.
here.
Very good. I think we have a quorum. So you have some opening remarks?
I do. Thank you. Under the bylaws, because Mr. Fraz is a ad hoc member, he is able to vote and provide the quorum for us today. I just want to make a note of that. Welcome to all the committee members, the ones that were on previously and the new members as well. This is actually the first meeting we've had since the ordinance was approved in 2019. Obviously, we had the coronavirus that hit us and everything kind of came to a halt. And then we had a lot of changeover with municipal representatives as well as the county board. So it was last year that we were able to get a full committee again. And so this is the first meeting of the committee in quite some time. We do have a couple of housekeeping items. Basically for the meeting, the intent is to go over some of the items that have come up since 2019 and discuss whether those should be ordinance revisions or they should be just a clarification memo from our office. And we can have that discussion amongst the committee members. We can present the information that we have, and then we would recommend that the committee open it up to public comment to either add to those items or clarify the items that we have presented. I would just introduce myself, Jody Walnick. I am the Stormwater Director for Kane County. We also have Ann Wilford here as well. She does floodplain management for the county, as well as serving as the administrator for unincorporated Kane County permitting. And in the audience, we have Rob Linke, who is our wetlands specialist, as well as Deanne Orlick, who does our violations, as well as subdivisions for the county. Okay, the first item of business, we have Mr. Berman here running the meeting today. He was previously appointed chair of this committee as the mayor of North Aurora. So in order to continue serving, he would need to be reappointed or another person selected to be the chairperson. I will remind everybody of the bylaws. We need to appoint a chairperson as well as a vice chairperson. The chairperson can either be a county or municipal representative, and the vice chairperson can be either a county or municipal representative, but they can't be both from the county or both from the municipalities. The other item is that they cannot be from the same planning district. And so we have Matt Broley and Ms. Bates from Planning Area 1, Mr. Berman, Ms. Beck from Planning Area 2, Mr. Martin, Mr. Burns from Planning Area 3, Mr. Kenyon, Mr. Captain from Planning Area 4, Mr. Sanchez and Mr. Pickett from 5, and Ms. Wojnicki and Mrs. Keenan from Planning Area 6. So if we're appointing somebody, those can't be paired up with the same planning area. So I would open it up to the committee, to Mr. Berman, to accept nominations for those positions.
Well, I would accept nominations for chairman. I would like to nominate Matt Broley for chairman.
I'm happy to second that nomination.
Are there any other nominations?
I'd like to know how Matt Broley feels about that.
He feels excited.
Honored to serve.
Normally, we'd stick this on one of the members that isn't here.
Right.
Oh, that doesn't sound like
I
much
move the
of an honor.
nominations be
Oh,
closed.
I must say that Matt has certainly had an interest in this part of it ever since the beginning. So I think he's certainly the most qualified and will probably do the best job. So can we vote on that? Can we have a roll call vote on the chairman of our Stormwater Management Planning Committee, Matt Ball?
Broley,
Yes.
Beck,
Yes.
Burns,
Yes.
Captain, Pickett,
Yo,
Conan, Bates,
Yes, Bates, yes.
Berman,
Berman, yes.
Kenyon, Martin,
Martin, yes.
Sanchez,
Sanchez, yes.
Oniki,
Yes,
Fraz.
Raz, yes.
Very good. Thank you. Congratulations. Man, you,
Yeah.
you can handle the rest of the meeting.
All right. I don't need to move, do I? Can do it from here?
No, you can do it right from there.
All right, perfect. And I certainly hope that that was Mayor Pickett voting no for
I
this.
thought, yo.
Yeah.
it's a yo, it's a yes.
Yeah. We'll see what the minutes say.
They say yes.
Ah, this microphone
They
works.
say
very well.
yo.
All right. Thank you. I appreciate it. I 100% unprepared for this, but we'll make it work. Moving on to the next item is the election of a vice chair. This time I'll open up the floor for a nomination. It has to be a member of the Kane County Board.
It would be Berman, Martin, Kenyon, Sanchez, or Wojnicki.
Because I'm in the wrong, we're in the same district, correct?
Correct.
I would, this is Drew Fries. I would nominate Barbara Nicky.
this is Wojnicki. I would nominate Dale Berman.
I would accept the nomination.
Since Mr.
Oh.
Berman has accepted, I will withdraw my nomination of Ms. Wonicky and support Mr. Berman.
Thank you, Mr. Fraz.
All right. Are there any other nominations? All right, I'll close the floor to that and have a roll call vote.
Broley,
Yes.
Beck,
Yes.
Burns,
Yes.
Captain, Pickett,
Yo,
Conan, Bates,
Bates, yes.
Berman,
Berman, yes.
Kenyon, Martin,
Martin, yes.
Sanchez,
Sanchez, yes.
Oniki,
Yes,
Fraz.
Raz, yes.
All right, and that carries. Congrats. You've officially been demoted.
Thank you.
Item 5 on the agenda is designation of the ex-officio members. There are 3 that are listed here. Do we talk about these individually or?
However you prefer, by the bylaws, one of the ex officio members is a member of the county board, typically the chairman of the transportation committee. So that would be re-accepting Drew Fraz in that position, the county board chairperson. And then the municipal representative was previously the deputy mayor of the city of Aurora, who is no longer in that position. And so we would accept any nominations for that, or they can be provided to our office and we can bring them that nomination to a future meeting.
Perfect. So since the first 2 seem very easy, do we vote on these as well? If it pleases the board, I would like to take A and B, because that's really the only 2 we're going to take action on, is Drew Fraz, the chairman of the Transportation Committee, and then the county board chair as an ex officio member as well. Is there a motion?
I move that.
Happy to second.
Moved by Berman, second by Burns. Call roll.
Broley,
Yes.
Beck,
Yes.
Burns,
Yes.
Captain, Pickett,
yo,
Conan, Bates,
Bates, yes.
sorry, Berman,
Berman, yes.
Kenyon, Martin,
Martin, yes.
Sanchez,
Sanchez, yes.
Wonicky,
yes,
Fraz.
Raz, yes.
All right, that carries unanimously. The municipal representative, certainly open up the floor to anybody who knows of anybody that might be interested. The other thing we can do is, go ahead.
I would nominate Mayor Burns if he's so willing.
This would be somebody that isn't on the committee already.
Oh, off the, okay.
Mhm.
Do you want to get off the? No. I know in the past, it was important for the city of Aurora to be represented. Mavis Bates and I represent that district, but to have them sort of involved in the process, not sort of, but actually involved. So I would certainly like to reach out to them and anybody else who's not represented that feels like their voice needs to be heard here. One thing that we can do is discuss this or serve this up to the Metro West folks, that represents King County, to see if there's any interest there as well.
Could I nominate Ken Schroff?
It would have to be an elected official based on the bylaws.
Elected official, okay,
It could be an alderman. It doesn't need to be a mayor. It could also be an alderman.
okay.
Could I nominate Mike Terrell from Campton Hills? I'm not sure if he would like that, but I think I'd like to nominate him.
So should we compile a list? And
Perfect.
then
We can
report
reach
back?
out to a Metro West, Aurora, and Mike Turo.
Yeah, perfect. Any others? All right. Moving on.
I'm going to nominate Mike Seville, please, from Aurora,
Perfect.
without asking him at all.
And yeah, and is his ward is in Kane County, right?
Yes, he's an Aurora alderman and kind of in the middle of Aurora.
Okay, perfect.
Is this is one position we're talking about, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
And again, if there's any others between now and the next meeting, certainly pass that along to Jody, and we can add that on to our discussions for the next meeting. All right, item 6 this evening, or this afternoon, is the approval of the minutes from June 11th of 2019 and July 14th of 2020. I'm sure you remember it well.
Rouse moves.
Berman second.
Any further discussion? All right, call the roll.
Broley,
Yes.
Beck,
Yes.
Burns,
Yes.
Captain, Pickett,
Yo,
Conan, Bates,
Abstain. I don't think I was on the board.
I wasn't either. I was questioning that just now.
Berman,
Berman, yes.
Kenyon, Martin,
Martin, yes.
Sanchez,
Sanchez, yes.
Bonicki,
Yes.
Raz.
Rouse, yes.
All right, and that carries. Thank you. Item 7 today is to set a meeting schedule going forward. Jody, did you have a?
Yeah, I just wanted to make a comment on that and open it up to discussion. We originally polled the committee 4 or 5 years ago on what worked best for everyone. It's a bit of a challenge having a mixed municipal and county committee because of the fact that most of the municipal meetings are in the evening and then the county meetings are in the mornings. And so we picked the 4 o'clock after the county board meeting quite a bit ago when a lot of people that are here today weren't on this committee. So we can do another doodle type poll to see what works for everybody, or we can continue on with the second Tuesday at 4 o'clock if that works better. I think now that we have the ability to do Zoom, that probably helps out with people's schedule, not having to drive all the way here to Geneva if you want to attend the meeting virtually. So I just open it up for discussion and see what everybody thinks about that.
Fraz speaking, my thoughts are, I do like the late afternoon, but I'm just wondering if we could piggyback it on something else, like before committee of the whole or something along those lines. I'm thinking in terms like Mr. Caius, we were all at a meeting here this morning and went till noon. And if you live up in Algonquin, it's almost a 3-hour commitment to drive home and come back, or else you got to spend the afternoon.
He's not on the.
I'm not on the
Nice as
committee.
that is in lovely Geneva.
Mr. Caius isn't on the.
Well, I know, I'm just saying any board member or anybody that might be on this, it's just,
Sanchez.
just because it's the same day as the county board, if the county board meeting ends at 11:30, and this meeting's at 4, there's really not a whole lot of benefit. But I just like piggybacking meetings if it's going to be a late afternoon.
I'm pretty flexible.
As am I.
I like Drew's
I think your
idea.
idea is very good.
Yes, I do too. I do too.
We don't
Piggyback on
always have
the-
a committee of the whole meeting, but that's
Committee
all
of the
right.
whole?
That's true.
Go ahead, Mavis.
Yeah, piggyback on the committee of the whole. That sounds like a good idea.
And that's the,
Committee of the whole is
Fourth-
usually at 4
fourth.
o'clock, so we could do like 2:30 or something like that, or
What's-
3.
Forest Preserve,
fourth,
Finance, is it? too?
right, right.
Oh.
And then count.
Then that might
So
not
that's on the
work.
fourth Tuesday of the month.
They already have 2 o'clock taken then.
What?
Committee, Forest Preserve Finance, correct? Yeah. Sorry about that.
Well, that's two. I thought you said after the cow.
That too.
You know, I hate to, why don't we just leave it like it is? Well, I mean, Drew's point is well taken, but, you know, there's not going to be, we have a lot of unknowns here.
I guess we don't meet monthly, so it's not that big of a burden.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, Jody, what is the expectation going forward as far as meetings for us?
We're supposed to be having these meetings quarterly, but by the
Mhm.
FEMA requirements and the state requirements, the challenge is that even having 3 years in between our last meeting, we just have enough to cover an agenda. So just calling everybody together for a meeting that doesn't have any content, I'm not sure is in our best interest either. So our intent would be like quarterly at the worst case, but probably more annually by like, or twice a year type of meeting, unless there were to be changes to wetland regulations or something like that that we need to react to in regards to changes to the ordinance.
Okay.
I would also just mention on the piggybacking thing, we do have 6 municipal members. And so the challenge is if your cow meeting goes long, we have other people, half of the committee that's waiting around for the county's meeting to finish.
Mm.
What did you say about the FEMA requirement? How many meetings?
It's supposed to be quarterly.
Can we hold, I'm searching for the words if somebody can come up with it, hold a meeting by acclamation?
To be
Oh, and-
determined.
And endorse things to date and continue on without actually being, I mean, do we meet the, I don't want to have a useless meeting for anybody is my point. And if we don't need it, is there a way procedurally that we can comply with the FEMA regulations?
Potentially, yes. And I would say it's a state requirement, right? Not FEMA, the quarterly meetings.
Yeah, I believe it's a state requirement. We could also, in all fairness, from the meetings that we have, we don't require a quorum or a vote for all 4 of those meetings every year. So we could have like more educational based or update based meetings that would be perhaps even more convenient to attend remotely.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So, and maybe better attended by the public too, if we, you know,
They could be
Flood
attended-
awareness
They could be
or-
attended by the staff and the chairman.
there you go.
And open on Zoom and YouTube that if there were a PowerPoint presentation or something given or a webinar, that would give sufficient, you know, credit to having a meeting. So.
Okay. What's the pleasure of the committee on date and time?
Fraz speaking, I'm open anytime. I guess I was thinking it was gonna be a little more regular. So if it's gonna be, even if it's quarterly, the 4 o'clock, I think works for most people.
Can we have it after our second Tuesday of the month county board meeting? Maybe like at 1 o'clock, something like that?
I think the idea was
What-
to help, to work with the municipal people, that we'd have it later in the day.
Okay, because they generally hold their meetings in the evening, but yeah, whatever works is fine.
You know,
I
what would
can
make
send,
sense?
based
Yeah.
on this conversation, I can send out a couple options and see what
Mhm.
the most votes are for.
Yep.
But kind of still looking in the midday afternoon type period
Yep.
based on this
Mhm.
feedback. Thank
Perfect.
you.
Yeah, it'd be important to get the opinions of the folks that couldn't make this meeting, because maybe that's why, so. All right. Stay tuned for that. So we take no action on setting a meeting schedule. All right, item 8, Stormwater Direct Report.
Okay, I'll give Blair a minute to pull up the PowerPoint.
I hope the people on YouTube can hear us super clearly, because it is amazingly loud in here when we talk. Holy cow.
On Zoom, you're coming too loud and clear.
Awesome.
Good. All right, so we just have a few items to report. As I mentioned, it's been since the approval of the ordinance revisions in 2019. Since we've had a meeting, a lot of that had to do with COVID as well as changes in the board composition. And so here we are today, and I appreciate everybody being here and providing your feedback to us as staff so we can make sure that our stormwater ordinance works best for all of our communities and our residents. So after we did have the approval in 2019, we're able to do 2 of 3 training sessions for our certified communities and our qualified engineering staff. And we had, if you recall, a large change to the qualified engineer review list. That was quite an item of discussion at the technical advisory committee. And we went from a list where basically anyone could get on that engineering review list to a list that's very specific for each community. So as the communities contract with their engineering staff, that engineering staff needs to be registered on that list with the county. And so we know exactly who is reviewing the stormwater permits for each community. And we don't have random people that never actually see a stormwater permit on that list. What's been really helpful on our end, revising the list in that manner, is that when we are doing training sessions and different educational items that go out to our communities, we're targeting the people that are actually doing the reviews for that community. And so we had these 2 in-person training sessions. The first one was a general overview of the 2019 changes. The second was specific to the floodplain changes in the ordinance. And the third was canceled due to COVID. However, the presentation was available online and presented to everyone by email, and any questions were directed to our office. So those 3 presentations are still on our website. Any new committee members, it's a great overview of the ordinance changes. If you're new to the committee and just want to refresh yourself on those 2019 changes, you can go through those PowerPoint presentations, and there's a lot of verbiage on those PowerPoints to kind of lead you through the different topics. The transition to the 2019 ordinance has been incredibly smooth. We believe this is due in part to COVID and the slowdown in development and the ability for everybody to ramp up to the new changes very slowly. So we did not receive any kind of overwhelming callers or questions that came through once the approval of the 2019 ordinance was effective. And we did see that most of the questions were specifically related to developments that had kind of stalled over time. And those developments had empty lots, or people were coming in with revisions to the original plans and changing their original development, and how those would be impacted by the 2019 revision. So we worked through those with each community as those questions came up. Based upon the feedback, what I will be going through next is the stormwater ordinance discussion items. One of the probably larger items that came out of the questions that we received was regarding the 5,000 square foot BMP trigger and the downstream community notification. And so I will discuss those in a little bit more detail here in the following slides. But those were certainly the bigger items that we saw out of the 2019 revisions that we had questions regarding. During the time since the ordinance was revised, our staff did complete 2 full audits of stormwater permits. One was actually, we needed to implement an external reviewer for between our staff and the community. The audit resulted in some questions that we could not come to consensus on with that community. And so for the first time, we enacted a requirement to have a external reviewer that was not involved in any Kane County permitting previously. They were aware of the ordinance, but they were not working for any communities. And so we worked through that audit with that community with the external reviewer. And that worked very well. The first audit actually resulted in the developer installing some downstream improvements. And the second audit resulted in some additional calculations that were required by the engineer and a minor modification to piping downstream of their development. Any questions on the director's report? Okay. I will jump into the stormwater ordinance discussion items. And these, as I mentioned previously, are a list of items that we feel should be addressed in the stormwater ordinance due to inconsistencies or items that have arose in the last 3 years that need to be rectified. The second portion of the slides are items we feel could be addressed with a clarification memo. And so I will go through all the items. And then at that point, I would suggest maybe we have some committee discussion if there's any questions, and then open it up to public comment. I know we have some people in the audience as well as online specifically that submitted some of these items. And so we'd like to get their feedback as well. And then we can go through the timeline that we go to from there. So the first item is, I believe, was an oversight in the 2002 ordinance, and somehow it never actually came up in the 20 years that that ordinance was effective. We have a variance process in the ordinance that allows, if there's specific conditions that are met by a development and not self-imposed, that a variance to various items of the ordinance can be requested. So under our wetland impact, you're allowed to ask for a variance, but we noted that that variance section does not include the buffer area. So it's kind of a funny thing because you could actually impact a wetland to avoid a buffer issue. And so instead of preserving the wetland and getting a variance on the buffer, our ordinance doesn't actually allow you the buffer variance. And so our recommendation in this section would be to add a buffer variance if you could not meet the buffer requirements in the ordinance, as opposed to the developer then impacting that wetland in order to make their development work. That one is pretty straightforward, I believe. The same thing with this one. We preemptively put in the definitions for Bulletin 70, knowing that the rainfall was being changed by Illinois State Water Survey as we were going through the process of updating the ordinance. And we thought we were being very smart and wise in calling out the most recent version of Bulletin 70, only to our surprise, they ended up renaming Bulletin 70 to 75. So while all of our communities recognize the greater rainfall under Bulletin 75, and technically by the definition, that is the most up-to-date version of Bulletin 70, we just need to make this change to actually recognize the name of the new bulletin being Bulletin 70 instead of 75. Mm-hmm. So again, a fairly straightforward change. I'm going to turn this one over to Ann Wilford to discuss. This one is a little bit more complicated, and we just want to give the committee a little bit of background before we proceed with this one.
Thanks, Jody. So this is regarding a change to the timing for development and map changes with FEMA. So a CLOMAR is a conditional letter of map revision and is issued by FEMA. And if you'll just indulge me, I'm going to read a little bit from our 2002 ordinance, which states filling, grading, dredging, or excavating may take place upon issuance of a conditional approval from IDNR, ODNR, and the administrator, provided no encroachment increases the base flood elevation more than 1/10 of a foot. No further development activities shall take place in the existing proposed floodplain until a LOMAR is issued by Fema. And then it goes on with some further conditions. We had originally kept this section the same in the revisions, and our tech committee really didn't have any comments on it. However, when it went for comment to IDNR and FEMA for compliance with the NFIP, the response that came back from FEMA and NFIP again, or IDNR with the NFIP review stated, if there is any increase in the BFE, the CLOMAR must be issued by FEMA before the encroachment or any activity can be allowed. Then, regardless of whether any further development is desired or will be allowed, the community must ensure a LOMAR based on as-built conditions is obtained. And so obviously we want an NFIP compliant ordinance, and so we adopted that language similar to that in the 2019 revision. Staff would recommend that we put this out for further comment from our engineering and technical community to see if there's an ability to further refine that language, given that we've had comments from developers that this is a time issue for their moving forward with their development. However, obviously we have to keep with our NFIP requirements.
Question?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I can kind of see both sides of the argument. So I think that's a good idea to run it by the engineers and the people that do these things daily. In the acronym, what's the M?
MAP,
Say that again.
Yeah.
conditional letter of MAP revision.
MAP. Okay, I'm sorry.
So, and that's issued by FEMA, and previously you just needed an IDNR approval to kind of get the earthwork moving. And the NFIP now requires that you have that CLOMAR from FEMA beforehand, so.
Mhm.
Did you have building protections, Dan?
That one is.
Okay.
Okay. Oh. So this, from this point on, our recommendation to the committee would be these items would be included in a clarification memo as opposed to the previous 3 items that were ordinance changes. So one of the challenges that we saw with the way the ordinance was written in regards to the 5,000 square foot of impervious area that results in the best management practice, which is completely new under the 2019 ordinance, is that it never actually states that that requirement only kicks in after the 2019 ordinance effective date. So there were questions from communities, because if you read the ordinance word for word, you could go all the way back to 2002 and enforce that section. But obviously the section didn't exist in 2002, so we aren't able to enforce something that didn't come into play until 2019. So we believe that with the information that is in the ordinance, it is unclear enough that wasn't intended to come into play until after the effective date of 2019. And so we would recommend for that clarification, a memo go out so we make sure that everyone is not applying that for impervious surface that was created prior to 2019. The next item we would recommend clarification on is the 15-day notification to downstream communities And that would include unincorporated Kane County, because unincorporated Kane is a certified community, and drainage districts. The language that is included in that section is somewhat vague. It does not tell you if, for example, there's a roadway that's within your community and your development is on one side of that roadway, that even though it's going into the next community on the other side of the roadway, that you should be notifying that community. What we've experienced as our staff through the unincorporated permitting process is that we're kind of calling this the good neighbor policy, in that we've seen a lot of incredibly positive correspondence and meetings that have gone on as a result of this section. And the item was originally brought up through the Technical Advisory Committee as a means to help communities communicate with each other, especially when the water from a development is leaving their community and going into another community, or from unincorporated Kane coming into a community. A lot of times those communities aren't aware of drainage issues that might exist outside of their community boundaries. And so our staff has really experienced a positive impact of this section, specifically with some of our larger communities. And we've identified issues with those communities that we wouldn't have known of had we not identified that and provided them with that paperwork regarding a development that was coming in just adjacent to their community. So to clarify that section, our recommendation would be, and to also, to continue to get the word out, that we want to be good neighbors to our adjacent communities, and we want to make them aware. And if there's anything that can be done in a development to assist adjacent community rectify a drainage issue in that community, we want to be good neighbors in that regard. So we'd like to include that as part of the clarification memo that goes out to our certified communities. Turn it back over to Anne for the building protection standards.
Thank you, Jody. So we've had several questions from communities regarding the requirements for adjacent to the floodplain. This is a new provision provided in 2019. We've received very good feedback from floodplain managers throughout the state regarding this. We're one of the few communities that regulates rising floodwaters via building protection standards outside of the floodplain. So that's a positive that we've seen from this addition. The confusion actually comes in a conflict between our building protection standards and our ordinance and the Illinois Residential Code. And so we recommend a memo to clear that up. And I've just included some pictures here where you see 3 different types of construction. And so the building protection standard, if you're adjacent to the floodplain, for any floodplain that's not the Fox River is an extra foot of protection. But if you're adjacent to the floodplain, your lowest opening should be 2 feet above that base flood elevation. And so you can see for the crawl space construction and the slab on grade, that's clear cut and no conflict with the IRC. However, with a basement construction, we would look that your basement would need to be at a minimum 1/2 foot above the base flood elevation. And then the lowest opening, so the lowest opening where we can invite floodwaters in, our stormwater ordinance says needs to be 2 feet above. However, for fire egress, the Illinois Residential Code requires that you're 3 feet 8 inches above. So that that 2 foot lowest opening in the basement is not the guiding principle. It's 4 foot 2 inches. So you're 1/2 foot for your basement foundation, and then the 3 feet 8 inches for your fire egress. So it's just it's just a clarification that I recommend and staff recommends that we send out as a memo to the communities.
I have a question, please.
Yeah.
So previously, looking at the top diagram there of the house.
Yep.
Previously, the lowest opening was considered the sill of the basement window. Is that correct?
Correct.
And so now it's the basement floor.
Well, it's still the basement window, but we have a provision for both your lowest floor and for your lowest opening.
Okay, I don't understand what's the difference.
So the lowest opening for the basement construction is the window, and the lowest floor is
Oh,
the
okay.
basement floor.
So I mean, I've received at least 4 or 5 comments about this from builders that I know that have had lots that were, developed and sold and considered buildable that suddenly were not, or they were expected to essentially build their house on top of the grade and fill up 6 or 7 feet. So it seems like one of these small things that, makes sense, but it really is a tough thing for a lot of lots to meet that requirement. So I'm just a little concerned about that being overly restrictive for a lot of lots, or could we have a grandfather, if somebody has a developed lot in a subdivision that was approved, does that still fall under this?
It's my understanding that communities are using this as the guiding principle for any homes that have not been permitted.
Yeah, so that would be my concern. If there's a developed, platted lot that suddenly, the owner of it, whether it's a developer or somebody else, all of a sudden has a lot that's virtually unbuildable, or they have to build a house with a grading plan that looks ridiculous. So I'm really concerned about
Yeah.
this. And it was a big change from what was standard in Kane County for many, many years.
I guess that was my question. And what was the status quo prior to the 2019 ordinance?
There was no standard for outside the floodplain. So there was no building protections for
And can you
outside.
just highlight where this is applicable? It's not obviously every home in a subdivision, but how far away from the flood?
So it's defined, adjacent to is defined by the vertical distance. So once you are 2 feet higher than the base flood elevation, you're considered outside the floodplain.
Got it. So if you're on a low side of a development, a half a mile away, let's say, not that far, but you know what I'm saying? Are you still subject to that?
If you're less than two
Yeah, the
2
vertical.
feet, yes, unless your engineer can prove that you are in fact not adjacent to by the sheer volume of water that would need to carry it
Got it.
to that.
Okay.
So
That's interesting.
like I said, I've had calls from people that said, boy, I bought this lot, and it's not like it was a lot, in one of the 40 or 50-year-old subdivisions along the river. These were high-end subdivisions, and suddenly it's like, oh yeah, your basement floor has got to be a foot above the existing grade. And it rendered the lot almost, worthless and unbuildable. So I just wish there was a provision for something that we as a county have already permitted and platted and approved as a subdivision, that they should be grandfathered in, or at least back to the windowsill elevation.
Well, and as far as the variance for a stormwater ordinance regulation, if there's a physical geography that's limiting, then that's a viable option to proceed with a variance to this.
The problem is though, and I totally understand that, honestly, is if we don't hold to that BFE, your basement floor being at 6 inches above the BFE, what'll happen is your sump will run forever, right? I mean, that's one of the problems.
Well, and then what we found within our department is that we also have a provision, and it's not included it's the next table, if you want to read on in the ordinance. You're also required to be 6 inches above the seasonal high water table. And we find that more often than not is actually the guiding principle versus this base flood elevation. So, and that's also indicative that you're close and you're at risk to flooding to that high water table. So that's been more of a guiding principle than this one.
And that
provision is at the discretion of the administrator for each certified community. And so they can make a call in light of Mr. Franz's comments, they can make a call to set that lower if there is no adjacent floodplain. So when we're talking about the 6 inches, it potentially is a groundwater call, not necessarily for all the structures that are built up higher. It potentially is a groundwater issue, not a floodplain issue.
Yeah, you're right. That's right.
Mhm.
I could see this being something that would be easy for a developer to miss in planning your development, honestly. You wouldn't necessarily catch something like this. I guess you would have the option of not doing a basement if that was your lot, but maybe it makes sense to have the TAC take a look at this and just make sure that's clear to them. And the one other question I had is, how does this correlate to that FEMA technical guidance, the one that is it
Technical
1001
Bulletin
or
1?
something? Yeah. Yeah, how does this relate to that? Is it not related at all?
Well, were you required to put your fill in according to Technical Bulletin 1?
Yes, but then your
So-
basement elevation has to be, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I do. And I'd have to pull up
That's the
technical.
one that I've looked at. I've never looked at this.
Yeah, I don't want to say without
Okay.
Technical Bulletin 1 in front of me.
Okay.
Yeah, but I think that's fair, given the committee's comments that we take this back for discussion as well then too.
Thank you.
Any other comments on this one?
So, yeah, so, and this is Barbara Wonicky.
Yep.
So if there's a question in a municipality and an engineer spots something that is near a floodplain or a wetland, then do they come in and do we review it as well? Or is it just up to the municipality to make that decision?
Yeah, certified communities make that decision for themselves, but as this is a new provision, as
Right.
the county, we've had phone calls about this, and I have not like had a lot of specific calls about these dimensions from outside of unincorporated. Mostly this has been in internal discussions, but what the
Okay.
definition of adjacent to is a lot of folks that call for clarification that we're defining it the same way.
Okay.
And maybe that's what also needs a memo clarification.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
All right, thanks.
The last item we have on the list of potential clarifications is the Ashto maximum width. If you recall, this is specific to linear projects, so it would apply to roadways or bike paths. And the challenge with linear projects is that it's very difficult within a right of way, especially a long project where you're doing a new bike path or a roadway, to do stormwater detention, because you really need a bulk of land in order to create an effective detention basin. And so the thought behind the table in the ordinance was that we'd allow some flexibility with these linear type projects to do a best management practice, which is much more easily done along a linear trail or a roadway, and not require that detention unless you were doing an excessively wide bike path or excessively wide roadway. The engineer that did the update to the ordinance suggested the Ashto maximum width. I have put in the table here, for example, for freeways and arterials and collectors and local roads. And it's been a struggle because the Ashto document, not everybody has a copy of that. And so what these widths are that are the maximum width before it were to trigger detention is not exceedingly clear in the ordinance. And so there's two different approaches to this. We've been asked to possibly eliminate this reference to Ashto in the ordinance. And then the other option might just be to include the tables from Ashto in the technical manual, so they would be available to everybody. So we kind of have two paths. I believe the Ashto works well in the ordinance. In almost every case, you're going to be below that maximum width. And so you're only going to be required to do a best management practice. But we would suggest, if that's the direction of the committee, that we include the tables in the technical manual, which we're allowed to update over time as additional information becomes available. So we did leave that as a kind of working document. So we would be able to easily add this into that document.
Perfect. If you do, and I don't know if you plan on discussing this with the TAC, I'd be curious to see, because I didn't do a whole lot of roadway projects, just to see what their preference would be, or the chair of the committee. But any other comments from the committee? All right.
I would just clarify too, that we're going to be focusing our comments and requests on the certified engineering list and the certified communities. A lot of the TAC members have kind of moved on. So we don't really envision reactivating that TAC committee unless we were starting from scratch. And I don't think with these minor revisions, it's the people that are impacted reviewing these for communities that we would be going out to for those comments, just to clarify that.
Okay. So then who would make a recommendation back to us? Staff?
Correct. And I can go through that slide, but definitely want to get any comments from the public on these items as well.
Yep.
So what we would suggest is that based on the feedback we get back here today, is that we research and draft any changes to the ordinance as well as that memo. Then we would review those changes with the certified communities and registered engineers for any feedback. We'd finalize those changes, and then there's quite an extensive process to get any of these ordinance changes adopted. They need to go out for a 45-day review. There needs to be a public hearing, and then it needs to go back through this committee, our county executive committee, and then our county board to actually adopt those changes.
Okay. Not to be a pain on this, but just kind of wanted to see what staff and the committee feels. I totally understand going to the certified communities and then, the certified engineers that review this stuff. But I feel like, and maybe correct me if I'm wrong, some of these requests came from the development side. It would be great to have either members from the TAC invited to that conversation, because I know some of those folks not only do, government work, but also do private side work, can at least convey that as to why they feel like a change is needed. But I don't know how you plan on setting this up, if it's a forum or emails or that, so. Any thoughts from the committee? Okay.
May I ask a question? What is a TAC? What is,
Technical Advisory Committee.
thank you,
Mhm.
acronyms.
For a little background, it was comprised of municipal representatives, local engineers, and then we also had representation from the development group. So we had the home builders and some of the larger developers that were also on that group.
And then additionally, didn't we have a subcommittee of that was for, on the farming
The
side?
Farm Bureau, correct.
Yeah, so make sure that everybody had an input in the rewrite, basically.
We have those email lists still, so it'd be very easy to include them in that this conversation.
Especially if we're changing the ordinance they helped us draft. Be nice if they had a heads up. All right, is that the end of item 9?
That is correct.
Okay, so you can see the next steps there is to review and then come back to us in the future. I suspect it's not, like you said, not a quick process, but we'll meet when needed.
Some audience comments about.
Before that, any new business that anybody has to bring before the committee? That's item 10. And then hearing none, I'll move on to public comment. This is the opportunity for any member of the public to address the committee. Is there anybody that wishes to go ahead? We have one here. I don't know if we have anybody online. But if you are online, if you can raise your hand on the Zoom, we'll get you in the queue.
Is that microphone?
All right, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to present my comments. The topic that I wanted to talk about a little bit was the.
Real quick, can you state your name and firm? just for
Certainly
the
can.
record?
I am Diane Bocart. I work for Manhard Consulting Engineers in Lombard. And I do quite a bit of stormwater management throughout King County. The concern that I have with respect to the change that was made in the ordinance from allowing development to occur after OWR approval versus requiring a conditional letter of map revision before any mass grading would occur. I understand that there was some FEMA and OWR requirement that we have to address. I would respectfully request that that information be sent to me so I can kind of review it, because I do believe that, especially in situations where you're going from an unnumbered A zone to a regulatory floodplain and floodway, that there should be some consideration given to that as to whether or not a CLOMAR should be required. The biggest concern here is that if OWR, it takes 3 to 5 months to get approval from OWR, and essentially all of their regulations follow FEMA regulations. So once you get approval from OWR, you've essentially proven that you're going to be permittable by FEMA. OWR also, before you go to FEMA, is required to send FEMA their version of their approval and a public notice. So you go through a public notice period and OWR approval before you get to FEMA. So that's 3 to 6 months of review time from OWR, and then you can submit to FEMA. So which also adds on a really fast end 3 months, but really in reality, it's 6 months, 6 to 8 months before you can get a CLOMAR. So it's quite a bit of extra time, review time that's there for something that I believe is already established that it's permittable by FEMA. So that's the one side, but the other side of the coin that I don't think really was represented in the PowerPoint presentation was with respect to what is allowed, the type of work that is allowed once you get a CLOMAR. The ordinance reads that filling, grading, dredging, or excavating may take place upon issuance of a CLOMAR issued by FEMA. So that's very specific, only filling, grading, dredging, or excavating. No further development activities shall take place in the existing or proposed floodplain until a LOMAR is issued by FEMA. And a LOMAR is a letter.
Excuse me, could you, hi, it's Mavis Bates. I'm sorry to interrupt. Could you explain a CLOMAR and a LOMAR?
Yep, I was just getting to that.
Okay. Sorry, thank you.
A CLOMAR is a conditional letter of map revision, and those are given by FEMA before things get constructed. And it's originally, my understanding is it's intended more as a step to make sure everything will be permittable once it's constructed. A LOMAR is a letter of map revision, and that's what you get after everything's been constructed, when the everything out there, the land is physically representative of the map change that you want to make. So everything gets built, the engineers and surveyors go out and prepare as-built plans. We take those plans and we incorporate it into a final letter of map revision, which we then submit to FEMA for approval. Does that help? Was that clear enough on that?
Thank you.
Okay. So my concern with the definition of development, it allows for, the ordinance currently allows for filling, grading, dredging, or excavating. But also development includes construction of culverts, roadways, utilities, and things of that nature, not necessarily buildings, but just the infrastructure that's required of a development. A lot of times these roadways and culverts are a part of the letter of map revision that we're making. So we can't submit for a letter of map revision until those culverts are put in place, until the roadways are put in place. So the way the ordinance reads right now, it really doesn't allow for constructing the roadways and culverts and bridges, but we have to get as-built before we can get a LOMAR. So there's a little bit of a conflict in there, and I would just wanted to bring that to the committee's attention and hope that we can kind of clarify that a little bit.
Thank you. Thanks. All right, is there anybody else in the audience that wishes to make public comment? Give you a second. All right, perfect. Is there anybody on the Zoom? Was there public access to the Zoom? Is there anybody on Zoom that wishes to make comment? Mr. Millet.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to, I'm Mike Millett, Director of Public Works for the Village of South Elgin. I just wanted to thank Jody and Rob especially. They did, and the GIS folks, they worked through on identifying ownership of the various stormwater management facilities and throughout the county. And then they worked with us and our local GIS folks to identify who owns which facilities, and that will be a great, tremendous help in us enforcing the ordinance. So just wanted to let the committee know that we out here are very appreciative of their efforts.
All right. It's good to hear from you, Mike. Can't see you, but good to hear from you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right. Dale Berman has made a motion to adjourn. Is there a second?
Rod seconds.
Any further discussion? All right, call the roll.
Voice.
Rowley,
Voice, can we do a voice?
Voice.
Voice, can we do a voice?
Mhm.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Those
Aye.
opposed?